We're going to talk now about a new threat by our Foreign Secretary, Lord David Cameron, that Britain and other countries around Europe may withhold weapons from Israel if they do not give access for humanitarian aid and assistance to Gaza. Joining me now is military and defence analyst, Colonel Simon Diggins. Simon, thank you so much for joining us here on the show. The first thing I want to ask you about this is this, actually, although it has been quite widely reported, is a big change from where we were on the 8th of October, where effectively the British government said, whatever it takes, you've been subject to this appalling terrorism attack by Hamas. It always felt like Israel had carte blanche to whatever we want. We have been on an extraordinary journey here. How comfortable are you with the current position Britain finds herself in by saying we're going to withhold arms from Israel, a sovereign state, if it doesn't comply with more humanitarian rules?
I think we all feel uncomfortable with this. I think all of us who are sensible and actually are supporters of Israel as a secure state within its own boundaries are uncomfortable to get to a place where the Foreign Secretary has to say something like that to them. We all also feel the horror of whatever happened on October the 7th, the massacres of innocent Israelis, the hostage taking, the continued hold of the hostage. All of that is there. But the other bit of the journey is actually how the Israelis then chose to respond. And there was a choice about how they chose to conduct their offensive and what the consequences of those choices now are. And while people do argue and continue to argue about the casualty figures, we're talking about 30,000 plus civilians who have been killed, significant destruction across the whole of Gaza, and now millions who are basically refugees within the Gaza Strip itself. And so questions have been asked even by Israel's closest friends and allies, and I would put myself in that place, close friends and allies, about how Israel is going to conduct its affairs. The issue around international humanitarian law is absolutely critical. There were allegations before of genocide, which I didn't support. I don't agree with that. I don't. Israel has been conducting that, but there is sufficient evidence around failure to maintain international humanitarian law, delayed aid and the rest of it, which has led and is leading today to the US putting forward a resolution in the UN Security Council to Israel, basically saying there needs to be a pretty well an immediate ceasefire. I think in those circumstances, then Cameron basically reminding the Israelis that the basis, the fundamental legal basis upon which we can support the export of arms to them is actually that the country concerned is complying with international humanitarian law. In many respects, what he's doing is essentially just reminding the Israelis of the legal position, what is there. But as you say, this is a journey, and it's a very, very uncomfortable journey for an awful lot of us in terms of those of us who I think would, I say, regard themselves as friends of Israel, absolutely clear about its right to defend itself, horrified by what happened on October the 7th. And we now find us in a place where the Foreign Secretary has to make these statements.
And Colonel Diggins, we learned quite a lot of detail from a letter that the Foreign Secretary, Lord David Cameron, wrote to Alicia Kearns, the head of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee in Parliament. And when I was reading this morning, it's all quite low bar stuff, isn't it, that the government expects Israel to do. One of the things I found really striking was this apparent refusal by the Israeli government to allow Red Cross workers in to see Hamas terrorists who've been captured during this conflict. And the Israel government said, well, we don't have to do this. We don't have to comply with these international conventions because of security concerns. That isn't right, is it? That can't wash, and the government's right to take action in this way.
It is. I mean, the point I would make, and this is maybe hard for, is that international humanitarian law protects all of us. If you've worn a uniform and you find yourself in an operational situation, international humanitarian law, the rights of entry of Red Cross, the Red Cross symbols, they protect all of us. As you say, it's relatively low bar stuff, and essentially ensuring that Hamas prisoners of war are being treated properly. It should not be an unreasonable thing to do. I don't understand why the Israelis feel it necessary to claim there's a security reason. But essentially, all that's going to happen is you're just making sure they're alive, they're well, they're fed, they're watered, and they're not being abused. I struggle to know and to understand why the Israelis are making it so difficult for people who want to support them to support them.
Yeah, and this is an extraordinary turnaround because, as I say, the day after the attack on the 8th of October, it did feel like there was sort of an international agreement that Israel could do whatever they want. They're severely hampered now. How much does any of what Britain and people across Europe is doing and suggesting. None of that really matters, does it? Surely it should be all eyes on the USA and their proposal they're putting to the UN.
It's a fair point, Jake. I mean, how much influence do we involve? The one point I would offer is that we are members of the Security Council. We have a historic role and linkage to that part of the world through the Balfour Declaration. So there's a moral issue and a moral imperative there. I think Israel, looking to its future, is always going to need friends. And so I think we would want to be their friends as well. So I think from the, if you like, the long-term strategic geopolitical perspective, how people think about Israel and therefore the way in which they will respond, I think is important. So yeah, immediately it's the US who are leading the way, and I think that's just the reality of life. But I think longer term, you need more friends than that. And a US that may change its mind, we've seen that already in terms of arms and defense. What will a future Trump government look like? I would say that Israel needs as many friends as it can get, and I think most of us feel the same.
And Downing Street last night came out and issued a statement about Lord Cameron, David Cameron, the Foreign Secretary's comments, and they said, and I'll read it, the government still believes that Israel is acting with international humanitarian law, despite the Foreign Secretary's criticism about Hamas prisoners' visits and aid being delayed. And that shows the tightrope that the government is walking down to support its ally, Israel. There's been a bit of a change of tone. Is it your view that this hardening of the government's position against Israel is being driven personally by David Cameron, who, of course, has just completed his first 100 days as our Foreign Secretary?
I don't think so. I would doubt it. What I would say probably is this kind of reflects this kind of two-sided element we've seen before. So recently, I mean, about 10 days ago, President Biden made a very important speech where he made clear to Prime Minister Netanyahu that, for example, there should be no offensive into Rafah unless there was a credible humanitarian solution. And he declared that to be a red line. He also, in the same speech, said that they would continue to supply Israel with arms, particularly the missiles they required for their Iron Dome system, which is what is protecting them against a lot of potential hazards from people like Hezbollah, and everything goes there. So I think there is this issue where people have got two sides of the story. It may well be that in the letter, which I understand was an exchange letter between Lord Cameron and the Israeli foreign minister, if you like, the second side of the story was not there. So I mean, it may well just be this is an element of correction to make sure that this is two-sided. We will support you when it's appropriate, but actually you also need to comply with international humanitarian law. I suspect it's somewhere in the middle between those.
Well, thank you, Colonel Diggins, for shedding some light on this very complex situation that is still going on in the Middle East. Still with me is Stella and Reem. Stella, I think this is quite a big change, actually.
I think they're 3 months late. 3 months late. The amount of lives that have been lost already, the images that have been coming out of Gaza, they're 3 months late. I cannot believe the complete lack of courage from politicians that have been shown. And people have stopped talking about this, but make no mistake, the situation is still extremely dire in Gaza. And I'm actually surprised at the fact that people are not emotionally connecting more with what is going on right now, because people are literally starving. And this is a choice. We have taken, as international community, the choice to allow babies to starve.
Well, no, but the British government, just to be absolutely clear about it, the British government has been prioritising aid to Gaza. In fact, it's been one of the most generous donors of aid to Gaza. And it's extraordinary for the British Foreign Secretary. No. But for the British Foreign Secretary, this is an extraordinary story. For the British Foreign Secretary to say we are going to put an arms embargo against Israel because they're not letting our aid through. I actually think, you may think it's late, I think it's the government doing the right thing.
I couldn't agree more. I actually really am impressed with Lord Cameron and the way in which he has, been handling the situation, really measured. There has definitely been a clear change in the government's approach to the situation ongoing in the Middle East. I do agree with Stella. I think it's an incredibly horrendous humanitarian crisis that the people of Gaza are facing. Of course, the solution is going to be to stamp out Hamas. It's unfortunate that those people are then also at the hands of Hamas, and therefore it is incredibly important that they are receiving humanitarian aid. I just want to read a quote from Lord Cameron's letter to Alicia Kearns. He said, "It is of enormous frustration that UK aid for Gaza has been routinely held up waiting for Israeli permissions. So, UK-funded aid being stuck at the border for just under 3 weeks waiting for approval. So this is a very intentional move by the Israeli government to hold up aid. I think that's disgusting. And I think it's fantastic that the Lord Cameron and the British government are taking a very hard line on this.
And both the British and American government are now effectively, whatever we want to call it, they're trying to force the hand of Israel to seek peace. And anyone who has got a shred of humanity inside their being wants to see peace. And the terrorists defeated, yes, the hostages released, but they want to see peace between Gaza and Israel and a return to the two-state solution. I'm very hopeful that we may see some progress in this in the coming days.